The winds howl, sweeping through the ruins of a city forgotten by time, its streets still echoing with screams from centuries past. There, at the horizon, something dark and terrible stirs a shadow that would forever change the course of history. A conqueror, ruthless and strategic, is at the gates, and his promises of mercy will soon reveal their true nature. In the shadow of the gates, the sky turns to ash, and the soldiers stand frozen. The stories of old, whispered in hushed tones around flickering campfires, now rush to the forefront of their minds. The earth has borne witness to the horrors he has left behind, entire populations erased, rivers of blood stretching across barren lands, monuments built from the remnants of the fallen. Now he is here, at their gates. His name, whispered in fear, sends chills down the backs of those who have heard the stories. His armies have marched through empires, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Cities have surrendered, but those who defied him never had the chance to speak again. The commander of the city, with a heavy heart, makes the fateful choice. The gates are opened. The soldiers, weary and beaten, lay down their weapons. A promise is made: mercy. The conqueror swears on his honor that not a drop of blood will be shed. He offers them a deal: surrender, and your lives will be spared. And so they surrender. But soon, in the dead of night, the terrible truth becomes clear. The conqueror, a man whose cruelty has no equal, will not stop at bloodshed. No, that would be too swift, too merciful. He has something worse in mind. Under the pale moonlight, the soldiers are marched, shackled and broken into pits, not to be killed, but to be buried alive. Earth pours over their faces as they scream, suffocating in darkness, unable to fight back. It was a promise kept. No blood, just slow, agonizing suffocation. The promise, a nightmare in disguise. This is not the story of a man who lived for conquest. This is the story of a monster who twisted warfare into an art form of terror. His name, Timur, later known as Tamerlane. His reign, a symphony of death. His legacy, one that would echo for centuries. Born in 1336, in the land now known as Uzbekistan, Timur's name would come to haunt the world. With a limp from an old battle injury, he became one of history's most infamous conquerors, claiming descent from Genghis Khan. But where Genghis used fear to break men, Timur elevated it to an unspeakable art form. Unlike other conquerors who sought to rule and rebuild, Timur sought only obliteration. Cities were not conquered, they were erased. Entire populations were reduced to nothing, swept away like dust in the wind. In just 35 years, between 1370 and 1405, Timur's campaigns are estimated to have claimed the lives of 17 million people. To put that into perspective, the world's population at the time was around 365 million. That means 1 out of every 20 people alive at the time may have been claimed by Timur's wrath. This wasn't natural disaster, nor plague. It was a deliberate, calculated effort to destroy everything in his path. Now, let us look at some of the darkest chapters in this empire of terror. The fall of Sivas, a promise kept. A city lost. It was the year 1400 when Timur's armies approached the city of Sivas, located in what is now Turkey. The city was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire, defended by a garrison of Armenian Christian soldiers. These men knew what was coming, for Timur's reputation had spread far and wide. They knew of his promises that had been broken by every conquered city, but always with a horrific twist. surrender or die. These were the only choices given to those who resisted. So when the gates of Sivas opened, the soldiers, defeated and broken, walked out, laying down their weapons. Timur made a vow. He swore that not a drop of blood would be shed. A solemn vow, one that meant something in this brutal age. The soldiers, confused but hopeful, believed they had won their lives back. But Timur had a different plan. No swords, no spears, just the earth. He had his soldiers dig massive trenches outside the city walls. And when the soldiers were brought to these pits, they realized the true horror that awaited them. They were not to be killed quickly. No, Timur's cruelty was more methodical. The soldiers were thrown into the pits, alive, as dirt began to pour over them. Shovels first, then cartloads of earth, torrents of dirt. The weight of the earth crushed the men at the bottom. The others, trapped in air pockets, suffocated slowly. They had surrendered, believing in a promise, and now they were dying beneath the weight of the earth. In suffocating silence, Timur kept his word, but in a way that no one could have imagined. The soldiers of Sivas were buried alive, and the conqueror stood before the world and proclaimed his mercy. Not a drop of blood shed, just death by the earth itself. Urgench, the city that vanished, but Timur's terror did not end there. He would go on to obliterate cities in ways that no conqueror before him could have imagined. In 1388, Timur turned his eyes to the city of Urgench, a thriving jewel on the Silk Road, a city filled with culture, libraries, mosques, and wealth. A city that dared to resist him. Timur did not simply destroy the defenders. He destroyed the very idea of Urgench. He gave orders to kill everyone. Not just the soldiers, but the men, women, children, the old, the young. It didn't matter. No one was spared. But that was only the beginning. What followed was destruction of a scale that would leave Urgench forgotten. Buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. Libraries filled with knowledge were burned. Homes, mosques, shops, every stone, every wall, every trace of the city was annihilated. And when the dust settled, when nothing was left but the ruins, Timur ordered something even more sinister. His soldiers plowed the ground and planted barley over the rubble. Not just a city destroyed, but erased. The land was to be repurposed, not for rebuilding, but for planting. The city was no more. It had ceased to exist in every sense. Its people, its history, its cultural of it wiped from the earth. The fate of Isfahan, rebellion, vengeance, and death. But if the destruction of Urgench was brutal, what Timur did to Isfahan in 1387 surpassed it in unimaginable horror. Isfahan, a city of art and scholarship, submitted to Timur's rule. They opened their gates, laid down their arms, and waited. For weeks, life continued under Timur's watchful eye. His soldiers patrolled the streets, taxes were imposed, but for the moment, all seemed peaceful. Until the people of Isfahan made a grave mistake. They rebelled. Perhaps they had hoped that their submission would be enough to avoid the terror of war. But they were wrong. Timur could not forgive the slightest hint of betrayal. When he returned to Isfahan, he did not come as a conqueror. He came for vengeance. The city was torn apart. Soldiers were ordered to massacre everyone. But this was no ordinary massacre. Timur set quotas. Each soldier had to bring back a certain number of severed heads. It wasn't enough to kill. No, the killing had to be systematic, a grisly competition to meet the demands. Each soldier had to prove their loyalty by collecting human skulls. The streets ran with blood. The air was thick with the scent of death. And then, when the killing was done, Timur ordered his soldiers to build towers with the severed heads, towers of skulls, standing as grisly monuments to the city's defiance. Witnesses describe 28 such towers, each containing thousands of skulls. Built in the very heart of the city, Timur had made his point. The city had dared to rebel, and now its very essence would stand as a monument to fear. Isfahan, like Urgench, would never recover. A conqueror's legacy, this was the man who would build an empire not on the foundation of cities or wealth, but on fear itself. An empire built on brutality and terror. From the buried soldiers of Sivas to the skull towers of Isfahan, Timur did not conquer with armies alone. He conquered with fear, with the psychological weight of his cruelty, with his ability to reduce entire civilizations to dust. And yet, despite all this, Timur's empire would not endure. His reign lasted just 35 years. He died in 1405, and within decades, his empire fragmented. The cities he had raised never truly recovered. The survivors fled, the history of the empire faded into myth, and the skull towers crumbled. But the stories of his reign, of his terror, of his cruelty, would never be forgotten. They would live on in the memories of those who survived, and in the nightmares of generations to come. The story of Timur is far from finished. His legacy of brutality extends beyond the destruction of cities, beyond the rivers of blood and the skull towers. What follows is a journey into the very heart of darkness, a story of the conqueror who reveled in his power, leaving behind a wake of terror so profound it still echoes across time. Delhi, the conquest of the Eternal City. The year is 1398, and Timur, now an old man, his body worn by years of conquest, turns his gaze to the wealth of the East India. The land of riches has long stood as a jewel in the crown of the ancient world. The Delhi Sultanate, a prosperous empire with magnificent palaces, bustling markets, and ornate temples, is the prize. Timur, driven not just by ambition but by an insatiable thirst for dominance, prepares to bring this mighty city to its knees. But as he marches towards Delhi with his vast army, there is no intention of simple conquest. No, this will be something far worse. Delhi, at the time, was home to one of the largest and most powerful armies in the world. But Timur, with his cunning intelligence, had already made his plans. The Sultan of Delhi, believing he could deter the invader with his secret weapon, an army of 120 war elephants prepared for the coming battle. These elephants were no mere beasts. They were covered in mail armor, with razor-sharp blades affixed to their tusks. To face them was to face the medieval equivalent of a tank. But Timur, ever the master tactician, was ready. As the Sultan's elephant corps charged, Timur had his soldiers load his camels with hay and dried grass, then set them alight. The camels, now ablaze, were driven straight into the path of the charging elephants. Imagine the chaos. The mighty war elephants, trained for battle, turned in terror, their instincts taking over. The stampede was not directed at Timur's army, but back into the Sultan's own troops. The battle that should have been the final defense of Delhi ended in utter disarray. The Sultan's forces were routed. Timur's army swept into the city, and what followed was a 5-day rampage of brutality. The sack of Delhi, rivers of blood, and a legacy of terror. Timur did not just conquer Delhi, he made sure the city would never forget the price of resistance. The streets ran with blood. Citizens who had sought refuge in mosques were dragged from their hiding places and butchered in the streets. Women and children, the elderly and the weak, all became targets of a methodical extermination. Delhi was not just defeated, it was obliterated. Homes were set aflame, markets looted, and every valuable taken. Libraries containing irreplaceable manuscripts were burned. The magnificent structures that had made Delhi a beacon of culture and power in the medieval world were reduced to ash and rubble. For those who survived the initial slaughter, their torment was far from over. The great city, once a center of learning and art, became a tomb, its people scattered like dust. Contemporary chroniclers described the horrific scene. The stench of rotting bodies filled the air, the city blocked from the sun by the thick smoke rising from the burning buildings. The streets were impassable, choked with corpses. But Timur wasn't done. Remember the war elephants. Those once proud beasts of battle were now captured by Timur's soldiers. But they were not executed. No, Timur had a far crueler fate in mind. These elephants, symbols of Delhi's power and pride, were made to haul stones for the construction of a mosque in Timur's capital. The mighty war elephants, reduced to beasts of burden, worked for their conqueror. Their fate was a final humiliation, fitting tribute to Timur's genius in cruelty. The survivors, those few who managed to flee into the surrounding countryside, would never see their city again. The once proud capital of the Sultanate was gone, left to rot. It would take more than a century for Delhi to rebuild, and even then, it would never regain its former glory. Baghdad, the final act of terror by 1401. Timur's rampage had swept across Central Asia, Persia, and India. His empire was vast, but one final city remained a city that had once stood as the beating heart of Islamic civilization. Baghdad was a city of culture, science, and knowledge. For 5 centuries, it had been the intellectual and spiritual center of the Muslim world. But by the time Timur set his sights on it, Baghdad had declined. Yet it was still a city of immense importance, both historically and strategically. Timur, ever the unforgiving conqueror, had already swept through the city once, forcing it to submit to his rule. But while he was away on other campaigns, Baghdad's rulers managed to retake the city. This act of defiance would seal Baghdad's fate. When Timur returned, there was no offer of mercy. There was no choice. Baghdad would be punished for its treachery, and the punishment would be absolute. After a brutal 40-day siege, Timur's forces breached the walls of Baghdad, and what followed was nothing short of catastrophic. His army swept through the city, sweeping aside any who resisted, and in his wake there was no mercy. There were no prisoners. Timur ordered that every soldier in his army return with at least 2 severed heads. The system of quotas was in full force once more. Killing was no longer about defeating an enemy, it was about ensuring that every soldier met his quota. And when the quotas weren't met, the soldiers were forced to turn on their own captives. The streets of Baghdad were transformed into rivers of blood. Men, women, children, no one was spared. Some sources claim that as many as 90,000 people were killed in this bloodbath, though the true number will never be known. What is certain is that Baghdad was reduced to a slaughterhouse. Its citizens herded into the streets and butchered without mercy. But the horror didn't end with the killings. Timur had a plan, as always. He ordered that towers of human skulls be built across the city. The heads of the dead were collected and used to construct monumental structures, towering over the once great streets. Each tower, each pyramid of skulls, was a testament to Timur's cruelty. Witnesses describe dozens of these towers, symbols of death, erected for all to see. And once again, Timur made sure that the city of Baghdad would never recover. The mosques, shrines, and religious sites were spared, not out of reverence, but because Timur wanted to send a message: God's houses remain. Everything else is forfeit. Baghdad, once a beacon of culture, was gone. It had ceased to exist, not just in the eyes of the world, but in the annals of history. Its people, its knowledge, its glory all destroyed in a single, horrific act of vengeance. The final legacy Timur's empire, built on the bones of the conquered, would not endure. After his death in 1405, his empire fractured, and his descendants fought amongst themselves. The empire crumbled into dust, much like the cities it had swallowed. But while his empire fell, the memory of Timur, the terror he instilled, the fear he spread, the legacy of his cruelty remained. His skull towers, the rivers of blood, the burning cities, they lingered long after his death. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying aspect of all. Timur did not merely conquer empires. He conquered the very concept of mercy. He turned fear itself into a weapon. History remembers his name, not for the cities he built, but for the monuments to death he created. The terror he spread was his true legacy, and it echoes through the ages. For in the end, Timur achieved something more terrifying than mere conquest. He achieved immortality. His name, synonymous with brutality, lives on forever, etched in the dark corners of history. And so, we leave behind the skull towers and the rivers of blood, the cities that vanished beneath the weight of a conqueror's cruelty. Timur may have been long dead, but his legacy, like the cities he destroyed, endures, haunting us still.